The first slide here is just to show you that we have lots of other grant programs. Our partnership grant program is one that's upcoming with a due date, and we'll be having lots of other calls for proposals and talking through how the graduate student is sometimes a launching board for other graduate programs. All right, so starting kind of from the top, Northeast SARE is one of 4 regions of SAREs across the United States, and we serve West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, all the way north to Maine, including Washington, D.C. So with that said, the eligibility is that graduate students, to apply to the Northeast SARE Graduate Student Research Grant, you have to be a graduate student enrolled in an accredited institution in that Northeast region. And then your proposals should be addressing a current or potential issue of importance to farms in that region and take place in that region. And all of our programs, including our funding decisions, are guided by our outcome statement here, which is our vision for the Northeast agriculture and food system. And we're going to keep coming back to this outcome statement because it's really a guiding North Star as you are approaching your grant writing for the graduate student and really any of the grant programs that we offer here. So the outcome statement, just to highlight a few of our areas of importance, we've got, environmental and health worked in there, a little bit more like business management around productivity, reduction of costs, soil and environmental management, water quality, natural resources. Those are all common themes in the sustainable agriculture, employment and quality of life, and just farming community of making sure that we have good pay and good work conditions for farmers and farm workers as well. And we will also talk through eligible topics a little bit later, but this is a little bit more broader on like thematically what is appropriate. So keeping in mind that as a regional program, you are competing with applicants across 12 states and DC. So typically we have funded about 35 to 45% of proposals that were submitted. And the maximum award amount is $15,000 for up to 2 years. Just a little caveat that the 2024 application proposal, so those due in just a few weeks here, we're not as, or at least I'm not as sure of what the application poll will look like because we did take a year off last year while we were going and still are embarking on more intentional diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice type work to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our community and also thinking forward about how we can have more accessible applications and make this process easier for folks. So because we took a year off, it might flood this year a little bit, but I wouldn't worry too much. I don't want to discourage anyone from applying. I think it's a good funding ratio. The percentage of people being funded will be pretty strong compared to other grant programs. And with it being $15,000, just to note that this is one of our small grants. And so the graduate student grant program can really lay a good foundation for future research projects with larger grant programs or grant funds, whether that's at SARE or another project or program. And just, I like to call that out because we do recognize that $15,000 is not often enough to cover the full expense of the entire project. So while you don't have to have any matching funds, if you do have any other funding coming through, there's an optional section on the grant application where you can include where you're receiving other funding. And, we wouldn't anticipate for $15,000 project to be enormous. Like we want to be looking at what the cost is that you're applying, the amount of money you're applying for and how that relates to the project scope and the objectives that you're trying to achieve. And then, of course, based on our values as an organization, Northeast SARE really encourages projects submitted from or in collaboration with women, the LGBTQ community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color or BIPOC community, and really encourage projects from or in collaboration with minority serving institutions, including the 1890 land grant institutions and other historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and just other organizations and farms that are in the Northeast and work with historically underrepresented communities. So the goal of the graduate student program is to really drive a new generation of scientists. It's intended to encourage and support graduate students by introducing them to grant writing. And we definitely, we anticipate that many graduate students and folks applying are, this may be their very first time that they're applying for a grant, and that's okay. And honestly, I would say SARE is a perfect first grant, because one of our core values is in education, and we here at SARE just view this as a fundamental learning opportunity, and we have lots of resources and support to help you along the way. So we encourage people to apply and really think beyond their immediate coursework as well. So some cross-disciplinary projects are really exciting, and really our goal is to, in the sense of a new generation of scientists, we also really want to build those relationships to help get you into farmers' fields, talking to farmers, into the community, and not always in the lab. And so this kind of comes back to our main objective, which is to have research that can be applied to this region's land and agriculture and water. So the number one question across the board that I have gotten so far is this an eligible topic? Would this be a good project for the graduate student program? And it's not a black and white kind of answer, which I find very exciting and exploratory. I think it might drive some people to a little bit of frustration, but here we have a list of topics that are included in the call for proposal on page 2. It is not an exhaustive list. So ultimately, your grant proposal should address one of the themes of Northeast SARE's outcome statement. And your goal is to convince the reviewer that your proposal will have an impact on the Northeast region. So looking at the review criteria kind of at the end of the call for proposals, where you see what the grant reviewers will be thinking about as they're reviewing your grant proposal, using that as the mindset of what we're looking for is I think a better orientation than getting too in the weeds of the topic, because as long as it's related to sustainable agriculture, it is, an eligible topic as it speaks to our outcome statement. So you might consider, if you want to do a little bit more digging on the research topics, because I know this is one of the questions that makes people a little squirmish, and rightfully so. But we have a public domain database of all of the projects that we've ever funded at SARE. And so one way to really think about your project concept would be to be searching that database with some of the keywords that are in your project or in your concept, just to see what's been funded and done in the past. And I even a step further like to recommend that folks do that search, but then do it again just specifically for graduate student grants, so that you can see how there might be some gaps between how graduate student projects in that niche area vary from other projects that might open up new places for you to be looking about how you can make your proposal more unique. And Yeah, I would just say, you know, your project should enhance sustainable agriculture and benefit farmers. And I hope that you kind of can come out of this seeing that the ambiguous answer of if your project is an eligible topic builds and fosters ingenuity and holistic thinking about your grant rather than the restrictive mindset that is prevalent in other grant programs. So all of our grant proposals are submitted into the grant management system or GMS portal at projects.sare.org. And this list on this slide here just walks you through the broad categories of the grant application that you're going to be asked to complete. It is highly recommended that you prepare your responses to the application questions before entering the grant management system so that you can just copy and paste them in directly rather than working in GMS as a live application. And we have a Word document that can serve as your template to guide you through the questions so that it's an easy transfer over, as well as there's a checklist included in the call for proposals. So you can kind of cross-reference your work in the checklist from the call for proposals with the template provided and make sure that you're using the criteria that folks are going to be scoring your proposal against. And the checklist is very important because remember that incomplete applications or submissions, missing materials are not considered and they aren't moved on forward to the review process. You want to make sure that everything is submitted on time, a very strict deadline of 5 p.m. Eastern on the 16th of April. So complete and on time is required. Because institutions don't allow to manage grant awards, or typically they don't, you do need a faculty advisor that supports the project and is available to you to provide support and input and sign off on your work. So this kind of faculty advisor piece is very unique to the graduate student grant. And they will be listed as the principal investigator on the contract. But the graduate student themselves, the applicant, is like we consider the graduate student the applicant, and we expect to see your involvement in the project from fruition to the writing and submitting of the proposal to meeting your objectives and reporting out on them. There is also, I hope by this point, most folks either have identified who they want to be their faculty advisor if they haven't already secured that down. But there is a way to see if somebody at your institution has maybe worked on a SARE grant before by searching that database with the faculty advisor's name. So that's a good way if you're not sure if somebody's a good fit or if they've worked on Northeast SARE grants before. One way you can do some due diligence. For grant reviewing tips, or grant writing tips, sorry. Reviewers are looking for you to identify a problem, describe how you and your project will address it, and really elevate the impact your project will have on farms in the Northeast. So your methods really need to be outlined in a meaningful way that tells the reviewer what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and when. And I think it's helpful sometimes to think about this really, and grant writing can feel very technical language, and it is, but it's also storytelling, like really making sure that you're starting what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and tell the story all the way through. And there's a lot of detail that goes into writing these proposals, and the information that you are responding to can become very overwhelming in written form. So just be sure that when you're writing your proposal, you're thinking about the audience and of reviewers, which is a mixed audience. They will all have agricultural knowledge, but aren't necessarily experts in your specific subject area. So regardless of their agricultural knowledge, you want to avoid using technical jargon, acronyms, things like that, and really just make sure that you're speaking clearly as if they were not an expert in your specific area. And I recommend to build in time in your timeline of your grant writing process to review your draft, and ideally ask another person to review your draft. It is very helpful, I would say, if you can have somebody that knows nothing about what you're studying, what you're researching, what you're interested in, to review your draft to make sure that it is coherent and that it is clearly telling the story and what your proposal is. The most valuable tip I can really provide at this point is to really use it as a timeline and work backwards from the due date. As I said, it's rapidly approaching, but there is plenty of time to still start and finish a graduate student grant proposal. As I mentioned, the first step definitely is to talk to your desired faculty advisor and work with them to confirm their ability to join as soon as possible. That can really take a little bit of time. So make sure that you lock that down first. And then be mindful that, we're a community serving education and research valued organization. So collaboration and other partnerships within your community hold quite a bit of value. And make sure that you're building in enough time so that you can think thoughtfully about your project, but also recruit collaborators and obtain letters of commitments so that you're building a collaborative project that is representative of the community and also diverse and applicable to other states and perhaps even outside of the Northeast region. And then my very last thing that I would just say that I think is probably the most important thing, and there's still time to do this, which is build time to step away from your grant proposal. If you're in your document, clickety clackety writing out your grant all day, it's really hard to edit that same grant on the same day. And it's very easy to gloss over mistakes or piece together how things are flowing because you've been in that same document all day. So make sure that you go for a walk, stretch your legs, and if you still come back stumped, we have lots of resources, a YouTube channel with more information. We have all of these Q&A sessions recorded and a full list of all of the questions and responses that have been discussed in these sessions, as well as my contact information, which is that northeast-gs@sare.org. And you can reach out and ask any questions from there as well. So at this point, we get to dig into questions.
And folks, you can toss up your hand. You can drop questions into the chat. I know we had some people who joined mid-summary presentation there, so I'm going to keep the welcome poll open for just another minute or two, and then I'm going to close that. And we can already see we've got our first hand.
Hello. Thank you. I have a question. So I'm a student from Cornell University in Geneva base. So I'm wondering, do I need to submit our application directly through SARE website or through university? Because now we have a new person in transition working as a research grant, but she doesn't know about the due date, that technical information. So that's my question. Because in previous year, normally for the students applying for SARE, they submit the application through the university. But now, since we have a new person in transition, so she's not familiar about processing this application, and also she doesn't know about the due dates to submit the application if it is through the university. So I'm wondering, do you have any information about this?
So I think I can, more from our projects setup, and I think we kind of a little bit covered it, Kaitlyn, with the faculty advisor setup. As far as submitting the proposal application, you can, as the graduate student who is applying to lead the project, you are the person who is going to be designated in charge of creating your account in the SARE and projects.sare.org. And you also have to have your faculty advisor create an account. And we know that there are often different steps that have to be taken with working with different universities and weighing those things. But if you're at an accredited university and you do need to get the signed off host institution approval, but that those are really, really it's you that's submitting the application. And if there's an issue with a host institution approval and there's a staff changeover or something like that, then I would reach out directly with Kaitlyn and get that conversation going now. Because we wouldn't want something on that end to prevent your project from at least getting in front of reviewers' eyes. We work out contracting after your project has been approved is kind of I don't want to make assurances too much there, but I know that we have multiple projects that have worked with Cornell in the past, so they are familiar with SARE's work.
Yeah, they're definitely familiar, and to change a faculty advisor is okay once it's been contracted. So just making sure that you have accurate contact information provided in your application is important, so that you're receiving all of the communications. And one of the questions that's come up in a few of our sessions and already has been, who needs to make an account, if it's the graduate student or the faculty advisor? And the answer is both need accounts through the GMS portal for the grant submission. So you both need accounts, and the graduate student is going to kind of like tag and link it to the faculty advisor. So if they don't have an account made associated with their email, they can't kind of connect the two to link the graduate student with the faculty advisor.
Okay, thank you for the answer and information.
No problem. And if other questions come up around that, feel free to reach out.
So we've got Matthew has submitted a question in the chat, and I can see Claire's got her hand up. Matthew's question was, what is the preferred citation style for this grant? And when writing the timeline, should the time allotted reflect the requested salary, or should it reflect the estimated amount of time needed to complete the task? My project will require more hours than I am requesting, but I am fortunate to have another source of salary funding.
So preferred citation method, as somebody who was in graduate school, it's the best answer. Whatever you prefer, just be consistent. Whatever is the easiest citation, just keep that consistent and make sure that all the core information is in there. We don't require a particular format of like MLA or CPA type citations. And then when you're writing the timeline, okay, so this question gets a little tricky. Because in essence, the question around writing the timeline and the fact that there's additional funds coming in to support your project. So in your narrative, you want to be sharing that information of additional dollars and support that is going towards your project. In the actual budget itself, you are only putting in the budget what you are requesting. And then in the timeline, I think that's a little bit of a grayer area. It just really needs to be clear of how many hours and what the request of funding is supporting towards the specific objectives. And Emma, given you just raised your hand, if you can clarify better, I would appreciate it.
Oh, not better, just maybe another idea. In a lot of applications where folks are working on a project that has additional funding, they'll have in their timeline, they'll clearly delineate like pre-grant funded work. And it will say like, this work is being done ahead of the grant and is not funded by Northeast SARE. This is what we're doing before the grant starts. And then it might also have a section at the end where it would say, like, these are the next steps Again, not funded by SARE, not part of the project, but that helps provide some of that larger context for reviewers. That could be one way to do it, but everything else, everything that Kaitlyn shared is also true and a great way to go.
Matthew, did that answer well enough for you? Great.
And on to Claire.
Hi, thanks. I have a question for you about the budget justification, where it has the narrative justification. How much detail do you think people are looking for? Like, is it a one-liner, or is it like bleed my heart out why I need this piece of equipment, or, you know?
So I would somewhere in between. Another ambiguous answer. So if your project is awarded in the contracting phase, we really go in detail line item by line item of what you are requesting. So the clearer you can be about the specific items in your justification and in that like narrative, I think the easier it'll be moving forward. And just knowing that that's like a phase 2 of the grant process might incline you to put a little bit more time into it.
Okay.
The narrative, like it's really, I would say the justification from the review standpoint is a little bit more, is it justified or is it not? So you don't have to, you know, write your whole diary about why you need it so badly, but definitely
Okay.
make sure you make the point.
And link it to objectives, perhaps, so it's clear. Like, if, for instance, if I'm looking at secondary metabolites and I don't have that particular column, and if I can't do objective 1 without the HPLC column, then I can't, you know, so like, would that be helpful, or is that too much information?
I think that would be helpful, but I don't know, Heather or even Emma, if this has come up in the reviewing that you've done so far, if you have recommendations on how reviewers like that.
Specifically how the reviewers like to see costs linked to the objectives. Is that the question? Did I capture that?
Yes, but I think it's a little bit more kind of the part 2 that some materials are dependent on other materials being available.
So yeah, I would say I think I'm still not totally clear on the question, to be honest. I'm sorry. Can you ask it again?
So I'm just wondering how much detail to go into in the budget justification, in the narrative section of the budget. You know, if I need to buy a specific piece of equipment to use on a already existing piece of equipment, do you know what I mean? Whether or not to go into all of the details specifically for that piece, you know.
Okay, thank you. So in general, my response is very similar to what Kaitlyn said. Be as succinct as possible while providing the detail necessary for the reviewer to understand what's going on. So if a piece of equipment, if you're asking for a piece of equipment and a reviewer might say, well, that's not useful on its own, you're going to want to add a sentence about like to add on to the piece of equipment that it is useful with.
I see. Yeah.
And then, yeah, and then to the, I think that covers it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I
Yeah,
don't want to go on too long.
it's all good. Thank you.
I'm gonna hop into on it because I think it's important to just think about it, you know, it's the narrative. You are kind of telling the story of the grant, and you gotta be, you know, it is great that the piece of equipment has backstory and all those character building elements, but you hold those as the author of this narrative with you. And then when you're telling the story, you're telling the parts about that object as it relates specifically to the project. You know, like it's good that you've got all that other information, but the stuff that makes it into that sheet is really, here's how this is going to be used during the project. You can do it in 1 or 2 sentences.
Okay, no, that helps. Thank you.
I can see Sujit's got the hand up. And then there is
Hi.
a question in the chat too that we will get to next.
Hi, my question is regarding the project timeline and its consistency. So I know nothing before August 1st will be funded, but when I'm doing the timeline, should I start it? My project starts in May. So should I have the timeline start in May to explain all the stuff that I'm doing before and then, just say that, it's not going to be funded. The work I do before isn't going to be funded, but when I do the start date of the project in the proposal, on the application online, should I still put the project start date as May or should I put it as August 1st? And then when I do the timeline portion of it, should I again only start from August or should I also have the work that I'm doing between May and August just to not to ask for funding for that, but just to say, this is the work that I've done previously. And then starting August, I'll be doing this, and this.
Yeah, so if your project is starting in May, I would indicate it as May. The caveat and kind of like thing that I really want to flesh out though, and we've already touched on it a little bit from Emma's response, is that if there's work being done in advance or with other funding, and that work is essential to continue the work you were requesting funding from SARE for, it's really important to make sure that that's clear, because what we don't want to happen is a reviewer to say like, okay, we're gonna review this project that starts in May and they're asking for these tests to be completed, but they're phase 2 tests. If they haven't done phase 1 tests, this project can't succeed. So if you aren't kind of setting the stage with essential information, it could be a little confusing or reviewers may see it that you don't have all the tools you need to be successful in that project's completion. So if it's essential groundwork, you do want to mention that in the narrative forms, and maybe you're putting your time before May. If there is essential work going on, you're just not asking for funding for it, but make sure that you're making a distinction and very clear of what the dollars you're asking SARE for and what they are going to be used for.
Okay. Yeah, my project basically, and I'm dependent on like summer weather to do my project because it's too cold otherwise. So I need to set up and do the initial data collection, but then I'm asking funds for data analysis and publication. And I guess I'll just clarify that like, hey, I did the setup on my own, collection on my own, and the funds that I need are for analysis and publication.
Heather, do you have other support on that one?
I just wanted to mention that to Kaitlyn's point, the information needs to be in the proposal somewhere, and that realistically word counts might determine exactly where it lands. So
I see.
perhaps that is the timeline if that's where you have the space. The previous work section is also a possibility, as is the materials and methods. I think as long as the information is in there so reviewers understand how the work you're asking funding for relates to what has been done, but it might end up being word count that determines where it goes.
Okay. That makes sense. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Before we hop to the next question, Matthew, does that feel, I think we hit your question right at the same time. Cool. Thank you. Okay, we're in the chat next for a question around third-party laboratory for tests. Should we ask for a letter of support? To my knowledge, that's not necessary. So no, that is not necessary. And laboratory testing is definitely an eligible expense that we often see.
Oh, we've got a hand.
Hi, thank you so much for all of this. It's really helpful. I have two general questions. One is on top of what we had talked about in terms of budget. If there are contingency plans, so if we plan that this will work, but if not, there's this other way we could do this. Should we put that in the budget or in the grant? And yeah. And then my other question is a general question in terms of letter of commitment. So I am working with community partners. I'm working on their farms, but I'm not working directly with farmers. So we have contact with the partner, but we don't have contact info for the farms in particular, especially because of privacy reasons. So I was wondering if it would be sufficient to have a letter of commitment from the partner, or how does that usually work? Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, great questions. So for the contingency plans, Heather, I'm going to ask you to step in, but I'm going to try and go first. I would say it might get too convoluted if you start talking about contingency plans. It's helpful to know that you have a backup plan, so maybe like 5 words to say that, but I would not go into detail about it. We are used to weather changing plans. We've had rabies outbreaks changing plans. Like we know that this is agriculture and we're very dependent on Mother Nature, among other things. So to pivot is not the worst thing or something we're unfamiliar with. I would just focus your efforts on making sure that what your ideal project, how you would like it to go, is clearly stated in there.
Great, that's helpful.
Kaitlyn, you nailed it. The one thing that I would add is just we do, to Kaitlyn's point, we do offer a lot of flexibility at Northeast SARE. If something happens with the project, just be in abundant communication. If you're funded, obviously now we're looking like way in the future, but it's helpful, I think, for folks to know if you're funded by SARE, just communicate abundantly with Kaitlyn or with your grant administrator. And as long as you're honoring the original project objectives that were reviewed and approved by reviewers, we understand that there's many paths to take to get there and that things change.
Thank you. Okay, so for letter of commitment, so, and I might, just because my brain can only focus on one thing at a time, need you to cue me back in on some of the details, but in terms of having the letters of commitments of privacy reasons and things like that, that you can have a letter of commitment that is from a farm, but isn't like from an organization farm, but isn't every farm that is at that organization farm. I think I would need to know a little bit more about how things are kind of breaking down for the letters of commitment, but we really just want to make sure that you have people committed. If those people change, again, abundant communication, but making sure that you are identifying who is collaborating with you. And then also sometimes in the narrative parts of the application, it might be helpful. I just fielded a question for somebody of, they don't have the focus group people identified, but they've identified community organizations that will help them disseminate and recruit focus group members. So there's lots of ways you can go about making sure that your collaboration and commitment from other folks is clearly demonstrated in your application.
Okay,
Is that helpful enough? Okay.
Yeah, that's helpful. So I think because I work in community gardens and we have I've mostly worked with the organization that manages these gardens and looking in terms of more on the ecology side of things. So we're not directly interacting with the farmers. But I think that helps clarify things. I think maybe for me, the more important thing is being able to work in these places instead of the direct interaction. There's a lot of outreach that's more on that side, but maybe I don't necessarily need a commitment letter for those.
And if the community gardens are all organized under one organization, that would be a helpful letter of commitment.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
I've had a question submitted to me directly in the chat. Someone is wondering, their current project they're working on is mutually exclusive of the one they would be proposing. Do they need to include the project they're currently working on, well, since they are related? And I would think that because they're mutually exclusive, you really don't need to, even if they're in the same area, but they could be provided as background if they're related.
I would agree with that. If they're mutually exclusive, it doesn't feel necessary. The thing that we've already said is just if you have two projects or more than one project, making sure that you're clearly delineating what the funds you're asking for this time.
And I am having issues sharing out the results here, but everyone who responded, everyone who responded has a faculty advisor, which is great to hear this close to the due date for proposals. And then out of our welcoming poll, we had a lot of people who were just looking for general information. There were no specific questions in there. So and thank you everyone who's been answering those. I've thrown up a commodities and practice here, one just to gather some information, but also potentially help you think of some questions. And we always, I'm gonna be quiet here now so we can give some space for anyone who's got some more questions.
I guess I can go with one. I remember one section in the outline for filling out the proposal. One section was opportunities to share the project and advertise it. Would you guys have any recommendations for options for this?
Xander, do you want to take it as our communications specialist?
Absolutely. All right. So yeah, in terms of ways that you can be doing outreach and sharing a project, a great one is always attending events to present on your study. That can be covered under the travel section in part, I believe. And then you could be making YouTube videos. You can be creating podcasts. You can, if you've got web tools through your university, creating like a web resource, like a static site for people to go to find out your data. There are a lot of different ways you can be doing that. There is a section under in the budget justification for printing costs too. So, like actually making flyers or a workbook that you're creating as part of teaching an event. It really kind of depends a little bit on your project. You want to let it flow through that. A big thing too is like look at the communities that you're supposed to be working with that you're including in your proposal, and think about, all right, so I'm saying I'm going to include these communities. How am I going to, what's the best way that I know how to reach these communities? If I'm in Vermont, when they have town meeting day, they have free pie because they know that free pie is going to get us that and civic duty. So yeah, just thinking about those kind of things. I don't think we can actually cover free pie in our grants, but it's unless you're having someone stay a full day for a thing, and then you can pay for food as if it's part of a training session. But yeah, the events and even making just Facebook things, hosting webinars, doing a session like this, and especially helpful, if you can be recording it and helping create a resource that we can help elevate to the national level, and then they assemble all sorts of different projects together into bigger resources. So yeah, just thinking a little bit about the trajectory of those things. You can check out our SARE, northeastsare.org/resources, and see the resource library and kind of think, all right, these are what the educational materials look like. How can what does this look like if I were doing them for my project? I hope that answered.
Yep, lots of opportunities. Thank you.
Oh, I see a hand if you want to unmute.
Yeah. I have another question about two different portions of the proposal online. One is the project description section and the other is the project abstract. I wanted to know how they differ. Like, you know, the project description usually is similar to an abstract to me, but I want to know if the emphasis should be a little bit different. Because it just says description will be used for search results if funded. I'm not sure how I should make that different than the project abstract.
Yeah. Vander, I know you just answered a question, but you might be able to or Heather just unmuted.
And my
Um,
apologies, I had to step away. So if that question got answered already, I apologize.
No.
I can jump in if it's helpful.
Yeah.
The project, I think it's just worth noticing that the project description is extremely short. It's 300 characters, about 70 words, and it's really like, this is, if your project is funded, this is really primarily for like search function optimization. Whereas the proposal abstract, that's 250 words.
Oh,
So that's
I didn't even notice that it was characters.
no worries, that we get that question a lot. Don't even worry about it. I just wanted to make sure that you caught
Okay.
that.
So is this like keywords section, basically? Like, you know, in a manuscript, they'll have keywords and then.
I mean, it's usually sentence format, just because again,
Okay.
like if your project is funded and someone's trying to access the information, you want it to be like cohesive and clear what your project is about. So it's really just like one's a very short 2 to 3 sentence, and then the other's an actual abstract.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. I should have noticed that. My apologies.
Not even worry.
I didn't notice it, so you're in the clear.
All right. Thanks.
Got a question in the chat. Are the budget funds enforced to the category we request?
Yes. So like I mentioned a little bit earlier, once you're awarded, we really go line by line under each budget category, and making sure that those are consistent is really important. We have a finance team that would flag anything if it was if you submitted something that is not indicated as a specific line item that gets flagged, and it's not just broad categories. So it has to be category and line item from your budget. That being said, there's flexibility to some degree as your project moves forward. So if you no longer need this test, you need a different test, just having open communication with your grant administrator to make sure that that's a clear understanding gets you to your project objectives is an eligible expense. We work with those scenarios and can make that happen.
And as for coming into the last 10 minutes here, we've got a final option here for just tossing in what you learned today. Helps us continue to improve these sessions. Thank you, everybody. And we will continue to hold space and in a little bit of awkward silence to make sure that everyone gets a chance to feel like they can ask anything that pops up for them, because we're just so glad to have you all participating in this. Got a question in the chat, working with farmers or on farms is in general, but the application of my work would be beneficial for agriculture. Can I apply for the grant?
Yes, as long as it will have an impact for, it speaks to our outcome statement and would have an impact for farmers, farm, let me go back to the slide. There's like land conservation, water quality, improved productivity. Like some of those things are not a specific farm necessarily. So if it will have a positive impact and you can communicate that clearly, it would be a good application for this.
Hello, I have one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm wondering what is the word limit for the outreach plan? Is it 500 or 750? Because the information that is provided on the website is different. One say it's 500, but the other is 750.
For which
The
category?
outreach plan.
Heather, do you? It looks like you're looking it up.
Yeah, I'm looking at the call for proposals right now. In the body of the call, it's clearly says 750. So I was just trying to find where it might have said 500. And
It's
I'm wondering,
In the checklist.
for
Uh,
proposal checklist.
okay.
It should be
Um,
750 then, I believe.
Yeah, it should be 750. Thank you so much for catching that.
Thank you for the information and clarification.
Thank you both for coming.
Please don't hesitate to reach back out if other questions come up. As early as possible is always great. So plan ahead for that April 16th deadline.